Yeah, we can start with Lacan here, actually. We're going to go into the second half of the book today and
Right.
concentrate the session today on the second half and why it's there to begin with. Um, yeah, we can start with Lacan. In Jacques Lacan's work in psychoanalysis, there's the concept of objet petit e, the tiny little object we're all looking for all the time but can't seem to find. And of course, this is our own subjectivity. We can't find it. That's exactly why we keep on living. But more than anything, it's really the imagination about the mamilla. We talked about mamilla before, this idea about your mother's tit. And we call it mamilla rather than mama because mamilla means it's a psychoanalytical term. It's a fantasy. It's something we're missing. And of course, when about 1 year of age, we have to push away mother's tit for good and never suck it ever again. We learn to hate for the first time in our lives. This is called objectification. And according to Lacan, this objectification of the mother's tit, then the mother's tit becomes this little object we're looking for all the time, so we can put it in our mouths. And any alcoholic will admit to this, for example, during AA sessions, that I am an alcoholic because I can't stop dreaming about having that bottle in my mouth and sucking something, like sucking it for its life. And so all forms of abuse that human beings do, for example, addictions, are all related to this looking for the mamilla that we're missing. And this is the objectivity in Lacan. Lacan is very nihilistic, which, by the way, it's very liberating. It's a good start to philosophy to go nihilistic first. We talked about that before as well. He's an ironic nihilist, if anything. But he never really discussed what could be the positive attribute of looking for something. So we basically just then take the objet petit e, the tiny little object e, and turn it into grand projet A, which is like the big project with a capital A. And this is a clever little thing we do in chapter 10 of Process and Event, because we're saying history is full of people who tried to create the event. So they weren't satisfied with just the process and the endless repetition of the same. Even if that is the foundation for everything, there's the process at the bottom. They were looking for the possibility of creating an event that would change history forever and hopefully in a new positive direction. And there's nothing wrong with this at all. We propose protopianism because we have this idea that we should do incremental, small changes for the better all the time, because that's actually how things work historically. But if you try to imagine the big event, like the big event that will change history forever in a new good direction, then this project is called Grand Project A in our philosophy. So it's the opposite of objectivity. So instead of looking for the tiny little mamilla, our mother's tit, to keep us addicted and to keep us calm and to kill our time, as we would say today, we look for something that will make our life meaningful and purposeful by being part of a grand project. So this is, of course, why we love skyscrapers. The ultimate phallic grand project is to build a skyscraper. So any man out there has made it in his life probably dreams about building a skyscraper, a replica of his own dick, which is like huge. It goes a kilometer up into the sky. And there's nothing wrong with that at all. Those are exactly the sorts of dreams we should have as human beings. Then we lay that out and compare with the history of ideas, and we return to the Persian Hebrew axis that we talked about before. Because obviously both Zoroastrianism and Judaism are religions that are driven by this idea. And the clearest example of that is the Exodus out of Egypt, the Hebrews when they leave Egypt, and the story about the Exodus. And funny enough, there hasn't really been a term for studying exoduses historically. So we invent the term exodology. So for example, when the Pilgrims left Britain and moved to the United States in the 18th century to be liberated and walked on board the Mayflower. When those things happened, they did an exodus. So we could have a general exodology. So the idea of an exodology, I'm going to leave a paradigm, an old paradigm behind and walk into the new paradigm, is the point here. The exodus out of Egypt is not about leaving Egypt to move somewhere else. The exodus out of Egypt is about leaving an oppression in Egypt and move to somewhere else to be able to express yourself freely. That's the idea. That's what it means. That's what an exodology means. So an exodology is therefore tied to event. So an exodology is a journey along the time axis towards the event. Therefore, the eventology we talked about before, like the idea that I could be part of something that changes history forever in a new positive direction, the obfuscate of that, or the complementary role to that, the exodology, means I leave an old paradigm behind. I leave an old society behind to move to a new society where I can explore and express my thinking freely. This is the idea of the exodology. So we lay these two things up. And where it arrives is tonight's theme, which is that this is all about man and machine, in the sense that we discover, when we look through history, that it wasn't really bright new ideas that changed history forever. Rather, it was new technologies that changed history forever. So we invent a new technology, you also start thinking differently because of the new technology and its availability, but it's always a new technology first, especially information technologies. The development of information technologies over the last 10,000 years of civilization are actually the big jumps. They are the big events. They are the paradigm shifts in human history. And therefore, there's something very sound about being a philosopher, dreaming about engineers, building new impossible machines. So this is what the second half of the book deals with.
So you're talking about the decline of religion as magic and the emergence of religion as technology. And can you a little bit elaborate on that?
Sure. The way it works is that our relationship has been most intense with animal. So man versus animal is what religion dealt with originally. If you go back to religion 40,000 years ago, the Lascaux paintings in France and other places you can find cave paintings, you discover that almost all the cave paintings have minotaurs. It's constantly this mix of man and animal. And it's because human beings always been obsessed with animals, because animals are sometimes more powerful than we are. We want to outsmart the animals. And because of language, because we are a collective, because we're a flock, because we stay together, we can outsmart animals. In most struggles between human beings and animals, we win. But to get access to the animal powers is something we always try to do. And this is where magic starts. Magic is to use any trick you could possibly use to try to get access to animalistic powers. So, for example, if you drink ayahuasca in small doses when you're in Peru in the jungle, you discover that you can see more brightly. And you smoke the mapacho, which is like nicotine, and you drink the ayahuasca in the afternoon, like a small dose of it. You can see more clearly, and you become like you're a leopard. So the leopard can see very sharply and is moving very fast, and the leopard is a fierce competitor to humans in the jungle. Then do you imagine you could think like the leopard, move like the leopard, be like the leopard, so you could have leopard powers when you want to have access to them. And this is what magic really dealt with. Magic has always dealt with doing spooky things to try to get access to powers, to forces that we otherwise wouldn't have. And what then happens when civilization arrives and we start learning from past mistakes, and we start storing information, and we start writing down our experiences so that even the next generation that survives us can learn from our experiences and don't have to repeat our mistakes, which is what civilization is, and which requires a written language. It requires that you write down the information and store it, and the information is passed on from you, and it's actually around permanently forever. The fact that this happens at the birth of civilization means that we can now start accumulating information, accumulating knowledge, and we can do better and better and better. And we start improving on technologies because of it. Then we also start believing that we're improving our ideas, which is often not the case. As we've done in the previous sessions, we discovered that the Axle Age was pretty much wasted, whereas the Bronze Age, when people built shit, was a much better time to look back to in history, because the better ideas were developed during the Bronze Age. But anyway, technology is where it's at. So yesterday's magic is tomorrow's technology. That's the first one-liner. Then there's another interesting twist to this. There's another one-liner in the book, you should remember. So there's yesterday's magic is tomorrow's technology. By imagining and trying to create something through magic that usually doesn't work, we start building technologies that do the job instead of the magic. The perfect example, that human beings must have dreamed about flying like birds. So they were man-bird and tried to imagine being birdmen and man-birds and whatever when they did magic. And maybe they jumped off from a cliff sometimes and died and things like that too, because they failed. Until we arrive at the end of the 19th century with hot air balloons and eventually airplanes, and human beings actually managed to fly. And we now fly across the world whenever we want to. I can fly to anywhere in the world within 24 hours if I want to. which is magic. Yes, it was magic. If you told somebody from 300 years ago you would do this one day, they thought it was magic. It isn't, it's technology. Yesterday's magic is tomorrow's technology. So magic and magicians and wizards are there to basically inspire engineers to eventually one day build shit. That's how we have to look at history now. We look back at history and technological evolution. And of course, the internet, the Hopi Indians in North America, when they were encountered by white European culture, it turned out the Hopi Indians dreamed about one day there should be a big spider, and the spider should then take out its web across the entire planet so that all people on the planet could talk to each other directly in real time. That dream was there by the Hopi Indians. And if you read our Synthesis book, you probably remember that this inspired Godfrey Redshaw, Francis Ford Coppola, to make a fantastic art movie called Koyaanisqatsi in the early 1980s. We actually say in Synthesis that just to give the internet age a starting date, we say the day when Koyaanisqatsi by Godfrey Redshaw had its first premiere in Los Angeles is the beginning of the internet age. So we can allow to, in retrospect, give a certain date, 1982. This is when the internet age started, because I think that movie is culturally, at least, the first embrace of the internet age. It was totally prophetic. And if you want to watch a movie, do some drugs one day, I highly recommend you to go into Godfrey Redshaw's fantastic movies like Koyaanisqatsi, Puakatsi. You're certainly pleased. They're very spiritual movies. But so this dream was there already, but of course the Hopi Indians, it was magic. Now we have the internet, and now we have Starlink. And satellites are everywhere, thanks to Elon Musk. And we can now talk to anybody in the world whenever we want to. So now we have the web. And that's what's called the web. It's not a spider web. It's a web we have made. It's a technology. So the other one-liner after yesterday's magic is tomorrow's technology goes like this. Women give birth to children. Men envy women for giving birth to children. Take that in. Men envy women for giving birth to children. Because if women give birth to children, they don't have the job. That's half the job. That's process. That's reproduction. Half the job's done by the female body. Women do half the job. They give birth to children, and they risk their own lives giving birth to children historically, which means that they're as willing to sacrifice themselves for the tribe or the sociant as the men are soldiers or hunters who go out in the wilderness and often are killed, right? So we all sacrificed ourselves towards the sociant. Women just did it often through childbirth. But women give birth to children. Men envy women for giving birth to children because it gives women purpose and meaning. Meaning men don't have purpose and meaning on their own. They don't. They don't give birth to children. Therefore, line 3, because men envy women for giving birth to children, men give birth to technology. Here's an interesting idea. Men give birth to technology. Yes, they do. It's men who build technology, not women. Just about every damn technology that exists has been invented by men. I know some feminists try to claim that at least a pair of scissors is a technology invented by women. I doubt it because it's actually just two knives anyway, tied together. So it's not much of an innovation. But, if you try to go through human history and try to find technologies were invented by women, you're not going to find any. It's men who invent technology, and they do it precisely as a negation against the fact they don't give birth to children. That's the idea here. So if men give birth to technology, there must be a relationship between children and technology. Yes, there is. Children hardly change because children here are the process. Technologies are developed all the time and more rapidly so. That means technology is the event. So the relationship between children and technology, children are the process and the technology is always the event. We can think that a child being born is an event, but it isn't, because a child being born is just a repetition of the same. It's just another child being born. And one day that child hopefully is going to be parent and see its own children being born. And in that case, it's just a repetition of the same. So childbirth is not an event because it's just a repetition of the same. What is a genuine event is the innovation of new technology, like an airplane you can fly, or the development and spread of the internet across the planet. Those are events because they change history forever. They're one of a kind. They cannot be reduced to anything that happened prior to them in history. Therefore, they qualify as proper events. And this is what's interesting. So again, we arrive with this position where we say that women are on the side of motido, but motido is underneath the libido. So motido is the motor of libido. It is the death drive and the denial of the death drive that makes us want to live. This is what libido is. So you do the same thing. You could do the same loop here, that women are first category and men come later. Process first category, event comes later. Motillo is first category, libido comes later. You could do the same thing here. Like libido is the negation of the motillo, the same thing here happens when you think about technology. So the negation is that men cannot give birth to children. The negation of that negation, to speak Hegel, is that men invent technology to replace the fact they can't give birth to children. Therefore, we have a world with children and technology. And then comes the provocative last sentence. And since technology develops a lot faster than children do, technology beats the shit out of the child. Or if you're frank about it, technology kills the child. All right. Well, that's obviously the case since Hiroshima, 6th of August, 1945. For good or bad, we have already invented a technology that can blow us up and kill us all. It's already there, and it's called the bomb. So, for good or bad, we managed to create the devil before we created God. The question is then, how do we go from the devil event, or anti-event, if you want to call it that, Hiroshima, how do you go from there towards the event of creating God? Well, that's the ultimate mission of this book. This is a book that celebrates engineers. It's a book that celebrates skyscrapers. This is a book that, if it isn't obvious, you can just look at the cover. It's a fucking phallus shooting itself out from Mother Earth into outer space, right? That's the whole idea. That's the whole idea. Where does that energy come from? What kind of energy is that? Why it's so wonderful? Why is the phallic force so wonderful? And what can the phallic force do with us and for us? And therefore, we say radically in this book that if death is the absolute for each one of us, and we all know we're one day going to die, then the ultimate horizon for humanity is to accept the fate that humanity probably also will die one day. But the question then, if we die one day as humanity, will we do it with some kind of grace and finesse? And we will possibly replace ourselves with something superior to us that we have created, which I find perfectly feasible and definitely a dream philosophers should defend. And this is where we can go on from man versus animal, where we started, which is yesterday's magic, on to man versus machine, which is tomorrow's technology. That's the idea.
All right. So, but could you elaborate a little more? Because you're very explicit. You say it's a religion. Religion as technology. Why is it a religion?
Well, if religion in the past was a religion about magic because we had nothing better, then religion was a way of socializing our fantasies. So we coordinated our fantasies by sharing a religion. And this, of course, the Persian Hebrew idea is that you can have a very sophisticated religion or even a philosophy as religion if you have a small elite that are highly educated. You can't expect that from the masses, and you shouldn't. So the idea of universal human rights, this Persian idea, 539 before Christ, Cyrus the Great conquers Babylon, and he doesn't kill the Babylonians. He just tells them, no, you're going to live inside my empire as your own nation. And by the way, we got some weirdos here in Babylon called Hebrews, and we're going to send them back to Jerusalem where they came from, where they're going to build the second temple at my cost, because they can believe whatever they want. But here's the idea. The idea is that you can have a religion for the masses, which is just basically the practice that you can worship anything you like. This is the sutra of Eastern spirituality. We're not going to interfere with people, whatever religion they have, as long as they love their children and do well. As long as people love their own children and hold society together, we're fine. So the sutra has to preach that you must love your own children. You must have children, you must love your own children, because otherwise the process stops and everything is over. So if that's the fundament, if that's the process part, then you can take the eventology part and you could create a religion for the elite. This is a sophisticated religion that pursues, it's on the incessant pursuit of truth, fundamentally. It's a tantric religion. It's in the incessant pursuit of truth is its goal. And this is the idea the Persians had and the Hebrews caught on with and thought was great. And later, this was the thing that kickstarted Buddhism in India and Taoism in China too. Lao Tzu and Buddha were also inspired by this idea that we could have a religion that required the incessant pursuit of truth, and those who could live with that, those who were okay with that, those who worked hard enough with their education to actually comprehend and understand that, could have their own elite religion. So it's a shared mythos. It's a shared story that we're looking for here. And then the question is not if religion died or something like that. Well, Christianity is obviously dead and over, more or less, and Islam probably too. But it doesn't disqualify all the other religions out there. So you could either found a religion like Zoroastrianism or Judaism and say, well, this religion can easily be reformed, or it can be packaged in such a way that it suits us today, and I can credibly believe in it. I mean, I converted Zoroastrianism because I believed in it. I believe in Buddhism and Taoism too. I could easily have converted those religions too. These three Silk Road religions are fantastic in this sense, totally credible. So the question is then, what unites us? And we need a shared narrative. What unites us is a shared mythos. And this is the job of religion. And we need that more than ever. Even if we're a small elite, or, the masses out there, they need their religion. But religion is always required. So anybody tells me that, well, I don't believe in religion, that I looked them in the eye and I said, but do you believe that you exist? Yeah. Okay, well, that's religion. Off you go. It's called individualism. It's one of the worst religions, by the way. It's also very boring, but you have a religion. Undoubtedly have a religious conviction. So the question is then, if yesterday's magic becomes tomorrow's technology, and we now learn that lesson, what is the lesson then for theology and for religion? Well, the lesson is that since we know that yesterday's magic was yesterday's religion, then tomorrow's technology should be tomorrow's religion. Of course it should be. Because it's the same thing, except that we worked on it and developed a technology that actually works. Brilliant. So what are the implications? The implications that we're probably moving in that direction already, and that after having developed the printing press, which made it possible for the masses to learn how to read, write, and count, it made us all a lot more educated than the past, and created the sort of advanced modern society we lived in for the last 200 years, then certainly the internet is another information explosion, especially with AI added now. It's another information explosion that is so profound that it warrants to be a new paradigm historically. So we walk into the internet age, and it's now moving very rapidly in that direction. And then the question is, to go back to the exodology, so where is this internet revolution heading with us? What does the internet want, and what do we want? And are those two ideas compatible with one another? Only a religion can unify and understand what the internet wants as its own divine power, and what we as human beings want, and how we can, in that case, unite with the internet to become one with the internet, to move on to something profoundly better than whatever we had in the past. And this is the idea of an exodology applied on the internet age. So we're not going to move anywhere because we've stopped moving in space. We talked about that before in the previous sessions. Space is done with. Anybody who comes to this book, to Process Event, and says that we're going to conquer outer space, I'm just like, no, we're not going to imitate the Hebrews who left Egypt. We're not going to imitate the pilgrims who moved to North America, because there's nowhere to move. If Elon Musk wants to go to Mars and he talks to me, Jan Söderqvist will just tell him, you can go to Siberia. It's empty. There's nobody there. You can have it, and it's warmer and has less radiation. Going to Mars is just pure hubris. No, what will happen is that AI will conquer outer space without us. Why? Because AI can move anywhere it wants. Because the biological intelligence that we represent is completely dependent on being on the specific planet. You can send as many astronauts or cosmonauts you like out into outer space, and they come back as wrecks. They come back as complete wrecks because the human body can't handle life in outer space, not even in the total confined environment you got inside of a rocket, not even there. We're not built to live on other planets except this planet. We explode even if we just go up in the air. We explode. I mean, we can't. We're basically constructed to live on the face of this planet at certain climatic zones so we can survive and try to find food, and then we can survive in those environments. And then through technology, we managed to go from 3 million max to 8 billion today and onwards, because technology has enabled us to be a lot more people on this planet to survive. Now we're stuck on this planet. And according to Process Event, technology now moves into the future at such a rapid pace. The one thing we can guarantee is that we're not going to go to outer space to live in outer space at all, because we're going to stop imitating our forefathers, not move to a new place. We fucked it up in the old place. There's nowhere to move because space is dead and everything is now about time. And since we're going to live along the timeline, we might as well stay on this planet, and they will allow AI to conquer other planets, because AI is driven by technological intelligence, and technological intelligence can operate under any circumstances. Technological intelligence can operate at 400 sub-zero whatever temperatures, or 400 plus temperatures too. Technology can be adjusted in such a way, and it can develop itself in such a way that the technology can operate as a technological intelligence. It can operate in just about any environment you could possibly think of, which means technology as we know now, AI and its machines, are perfect to conquer outer space and will do so, but we won't. So here you can see how the death as the absolute sets clear limits for what we can imagine for ourselves as humans. Or as I say, the moment I saw Richard Branson in a rocket in outer space, I sort of fell out of favor with the idea of doing it myself, because I'm just like, if Richard Branson's doing it, it's not that cool any longer. But we can certainly send off AI to outer space to do whatever the AI wants to do. And we probably will, or else it will do that itself.
All right. So speaking about this symbiosis between man and machine, there's a term that you bring up frequently in the book, the Messiah machine. So what is that, and what does it do? Because you're also talking about where all this is heading, the internet revolution and our symbiosis with it. So what do you mean with that term?
So first we lay out a fantastic Zoroastrian concept called the sociant. And since the Persians invented the event as idea, eventology started with Zoroastrianism in Persia 3,700 years ago. Since they invented the event, the Zoroastrian Vishdaspa did the innovation, started thinking about the consequences were for history. And then they saw that if you looked at the eons of time that history consists of, a culture could go wrong, but it could literally be saved through an event. So the really positive way of thinking of the event is when previous events are forgotten about, processes taking over the whole system, and we're going towards mass poverty or mass starvation or something else. And the civilization is in decline, which of course has happened with civilizations constantly throughout history. They go into decline, and often they go into decline when they reach a certain point after which there's no return, except for total collapse. So they invent the idea that somebody could come along at the end of a historical period, today we'd say at the end of a paradigm, and save us, and save the empire for another 1,000 years. This is where Hitler stole his idea of this 1,000-year Reich from. He stole it from the Persians. This is the Zoroastrian idea. It's called the sociant. And when the Hebrews in Babylon heard about this idea, they just came up with the idea that they had walked out of Egypt. And when they walked out of Egypt, they'd been led by an Egyptian prince, probably the first real monotheist, Moses. And eventually they turned the story into a story about Moses and his two siblings, Moses and Miriam and Aaron, which of course replicates what we talked about before, the power triad. Aaron is the chief, Moses is the priest, and Miriam is the matriarch. Also borrowed from Zoroastrianism. So you see very clearly that the Hebrews just embraced Zoroastrianism fully, just like Zoroastrians embraced Hebrews, because Hebrews were like, they weren't an elite that shared a language and shared a religion. They were an elite on their own without anybody in submission. This is why Judaism and Zoroastrianism never had any slaves. They got rid of slavery. They were just working. They were all workers. They were like on a par with each other. They were working. They got rid of slavery. Zoroastrians got rid of slavery, and the Hebrews implemented that too, because they had been slaves in Egypt and they wanted to not be slaves any longer. That was the story. So they invented this story about Moses. I think there's something about it. I think it's all correct. I think there was a Moses. I think certain people left Egypt. Everything points to that. About 1,000 years before Christ, there's a monotheistic sect in polytheistic Egypt, a remnant of Akhenaten's rule 300 years earlier. The Athenists, as they're called. Freud was totally into this idea too. Many Israeli scholars love the idea too. So what probably happened was that the Athenists left Egypt and walked to the promised land, meaning they mixed up with Phoenicians. And when the Phoenicians went to sea, they instead became cattle raisers, and just like the Persians were. And therefore, it made perfect sense for the Hebrews and the Persians to have a shared history. And they then import the sociant from the Persians into the Hebrew word Moshiach. And this is, of course, where the word Messiah comes from. also rhymes easily with Moses. So the Messiah we talk about in our part of the world, which we've inherited from the Mahdi in Islam, the Mahdi in Islam and the Messiah in Christianity are inherited from Judaism, but the original idea is the Soshant among the Persians. And when you think about it, it makes perfect sense, because the event we talk about, the event is a technological happening. Something changes history forever because technology changed history forever. And of course, with the atomic bomb, that's obvious. With the internet, that's obvious. But what if somebody could personify that event? What if somebody could be so powerful that they could save us in case something goes wrong? Now, in Zoroastrianism, Soshant is strictly a function. But of course, the Hebrews played around with the idea and decided it was a person. And that's the Messiah. So we're returning the Soshant concept, and we're saying we could invent a machine that could save us. It's even required after August 6, 1945. Since Hiroshima is now historical fact, we've been waiting for some machine to come along, or some inventor of a machine to come along to lock up the bomb so we can't blow ourselves up. And this is, of course, the dream of God. So it ties into the Syntheos theme of Syntheos. We had in the Synthesis book, we laid out already, and we return to that theme in Process Event, but now we lay it out much more profoundly, because what we do in Process Event is that we go back to the idea of synthesis and a syntheology, a theology on about the relationship between man and machine. If theology was the relationship between man and animal originally, then syntheology is the teaching of the relationship between man and machine. So we rewrite human history, and we rewrite it as the innovation of technologies that extend the human body into this incredibly powerful creature that humans are today, 8 billion of us on the planet. Then we see it, we have a map for syntheology. So we'd syntheologically say that our goal now is to create God to stop the devil. And when you think about it, that's exactly what's required. Otherwise, an atomic war will blow us all up. It will happen sooner rather than later. So that's the social, yeah. So that's the Messiah machine. So the Messiah machine is coming. It's clearly going to happen. Everything is moving in that direction. We don't even mention AI here. We say biological intelligence and technological intelligence. We talk a lot about AI in the book. We call it technological intelligence to make it separate from the biological, organic intelligence that we possess in our brains, which is different from the technological intelligence.
Yeah, I want to go back to this. So, are you talking about specifically an AI, or like a concept, like a individual concept between man and machine when you're talking about the Messiah machine? And what role does transcendence, or what do you mean with transcendence in that context? What does transcendence then mean?
Great question. Great question. We basically leave it open, because a lot speaks for the biotechnological revolution to be the next one. When I get questions about which is the next paradigm, I'll say from the point of humans, since we haven't really gone inside our bodies yet, and we just become cyborgs quite recently, and we know transsexuals and all kinds of things. So we experiment with cyborgism. The cyborg thing is still just changing body parts into something artificial that's even better than the meat space we're in right now, right? We haven't really looked at the brain and altering the brain, although we try, with different substances and see what can happen. It's called psychiatry, right? But we could think about biotechnology. We could think about biotechnology and start imagining that there's nothing that prevents neither us nor technology. Nothing prevents man or machine from merging. There's not, in principle, anything that prevents that from happening. It's just not going to happen very soon, because man is so damn complex, and machine is built in a totally different way than man today. We're not building biological machines. We're building technological machines. It's gas in, it's electricity in, and then it's zeros and ones, and it's a computer, and the computer make it look smart, and we just call that AI, or we call it technological intelligence. And technological intelligence can be quite impressive, but it has no consciousness, it has no mind, it's not even remotely similar to who we are. So It's very likely that we will enhance ourselves using technologies. Medication is a technology in that sense. We will enhance our own experience as humans. We will try to live longer. Longevity is on the agenda all the time. And we are living longer than previous generations did. And we hopefully still have a good quality of life. And we'll try to prolong our lives and live a higher quality of life. And we'll certainly do that. It's also part of technological change. It's a protopian thing to do. It's the right thing to do. But for now, and for the foreseeable future, man and machine are separate entities. And one has technological intelligence and the other one has biological intelligence. And they're not the same thing. The collaboration between man and machine, though, is interesting. That what we call symbiotic intelligence, the concept we developed at Danish Mecklenburg. So the symbiotic intelligence is there. It's exactly what's happening now in the world. We're using computers for just about everything. And we use computers for their fantastic processing power to make smarter decisions and be more informed. So symbiotic intelligence is what's happening. There's no AI without humans. And there are hardly any humans any longer without computers. So when it comes to intelligence itself, that is merging man and machine. But we're not literally, ontically merging man and machine. At least not yet. We're only enhancing men and women. We can't put anything biological into a computer. We're far from that point yet without making any sense to do that. But we're not excluding that opportunity in the future. It's possible it could happen. But right now, I would say that the man-machine merger, if it ever were to happen, and if it would both be a person and a machine at the same time, if that's the Messiah machine, then it's going to take way too long for that to develop if we're going to stop the bomb first. So if whatever stops the bomb is the creation of God, then that God, the syntheos we're talking about here, must arrive a lot earlier than any man-machine merger. A man-machine merger is a later historical fact in that case.
What time are we talking about? So because I seem to remember that Ray Kurzweil, I don't know what you think of him, but Ray Kurzweil says that he says that in the next couple of 10, 15 years, we will create an AI, a true AI that will solve this problem about, the connectiveness of technology and the human brain. So he says it's like a very short time span.
Maybe his brain, because he's a fucking idiot. Maybe Kurzweil's brain. It's a bit like, Heidegger, who spent so much effort on reconstructing subjectivity and called it Dasein and all that. And it's fantastic to read Heidegger's books. But it really is about Heidegger's mind. It's about Heidegger's ego. It's about Heidegger's subject. The striking thing is that most people don't even identify with Heidegger in his mind any longer. And this is the problem with existentialism. So the problem with Kurzweil is that I am such a stupid little idiot, so I sound like a computer when I talk. So of course, then man and machine will unite, because I will unite with the machine. And all you're thinking is that, yeah, maybe Kurzweil, but not the rest of us. So no, and history is not deterministic. You have to remember that our philosophy is transdeterministic, which ultimately means the future is indeterministic, means we don't know. And never in our work, anywhere in our work, have we given you a time scale that said that within so many years this will happen, and within so many years this will happen. Always saying that this is bound to happen. And this is why John and I have been right, prophetically right about one thing after the other in our 6 books. But we never said when something would happen. We never said AI would happen in 2023. Apparently that was the year everybody became aware of it. Most people had studied AI for like decades, including us. But suddenly became this huge hype in 2023, and all the money flew in the direction of anything called AI. Well, that was the internet too. There was one of those years, I think it was the World Wide Web in 1992, and suddenly people realized what the internet was. People had worked on the ARPANET for 40 years by that time. So it's just a general awareness in the media we're talking about when something happens the way it usually does. And we can't predict when that happens. The AI breakthrough in 2023 was also with the large language models was also surprising. The fact you could do something so simple and just put tons of energy behind it and then make it work the way it did, that impressed people who don't really understand what induction is. Then, well, yeah, AI deserved the hype for that. But when, for example, I'm working today with robotics, and AI and robotics, it's going to take decades before anything meaningful happens. The only thing we could do today with robotics is to basically create a lot of robots that are similar, and they can learn from each other's mistakes much more quickly. Because that's all you can do with AI and robots for now. Because robots have to operate in an embodied environment, like in a space, which is a much, much harder than sitting just with a language model and processing Wikipedia, which is what large language models do today. So there will be jumps and leaps and things, surprising ones, but AI will both be a lot more stupid and a lot more clever than we expect. That's the only thing we can take for granted. And it will certainly affect our lives massively, but it's not a new paradigm. Max Borders asked that question once. Is AI a new paradigm? I said, no, you're jumping way too quickly into this. The AI we have today is a direct result of the internet. It is the fact that the world is completely intertwined and information can be stored at very cheap cost. That is exactly the foundation for AI. So AI comes as a logical conclusion of something you could have predicted in the 1980s without knowing what it would happen. And now it's becoming a 2020s phenomenon. Hope that makes sense. Right. So we're not giving you the timeline. We don't do that. We're not futurologists in that sense. It's Daniel Schmachtenberger's job to do it as futurologists. We are philosophers. We're philosophers of the future. But we can predict and say this is bound to happen. Everything points in this direction. And if you're smart, you're joining the exodology into the age of informationalism and into the age of attentionalism, which is where the book ends. You go, off you go. Here, you got the 6 books. They're handbooks. This is happening. You can be part of it. You can be part of that exodus. Join this new sociant that are really, really on fire about walking into a new paradigm and see how we can make the world different than in the past. Not necessarily better, hopefully better, but different. And in that is a religious calling, which is locking up the bomb, locking up the devil. So there's a religious mission there that has to be fulfilled.
A couple of words. What do you mean with transcendence in this context? And, there's another term that you use, the Bard absolute. Maybe you can tie this in a little bit to close this off, because the Bard absolute is something that also plays a huge role in this context.
Yes. So to create a laboratory where you can experiment, you've got to lock it up in case something happens in the laboratory you don't want spread outside. So a laboratory is like a temple or a monastery. You lock yourself up, you close the doors, because you're going to do wild experimentation inside that space. That means the rules inside that space are different from the laws and the rules in society outside. This is the difference between Sutra and Tantra in Eastern spirituality. So whereas Christianity and Islam just hate anything tantric and call it sin, that's what sin is. No, you can't do that. You can't do the drugs. You can't have that kind of sex or whatever, because that's a sin. Okay? Then I'm just saying, no, I can. I'm just going to do it inside a container that keeps the outside world safe, which is what you do when you have an experimental laboratory. So to have an experimental laboratory like that, you need an aditonology, which is basically a Greek word for Tantra. So we can have a Greek, European word for Tantra. Aditon meaning the inner sanctum of the temple. So an aditonology is how you control and contain the inner sanctum of the temple. What are the rules inside the inner sanctum? Well, they're totally different rules to the world outside. And if you walk into such a sacred space, you're going to start doing things that the outside world will not understand. You don't want any journalists around. You don't. You close the door. You turn off the camera. You turn off the microphone. You have created a sacred space. And what is acquired is an aditonology. And the first principle of the aditonology is this. Nobody may walk in here who cannot handle this milieu. You can't have anybody in here who can't handle this environment. So there must be a screening process, an intense screening process before anybody's allowed to walk in that sacred space. So for example, if you do psychedelic retreats, you have a screening process and you take off all the people from the list who reported their interest, who are medications that are the wrong medications for what you're going to do. And you just take responsibility for everybody and says, no, you cannot walk in there. Because basically, if you're an experienced laboratory guy, then you are the adult in the room, and people who want to go inside that laboratory and think it's fun to walk into that building are basically children. They don't know what they're doing. So the additionologist's first principle is that there is a barred absolute. The barred absolute is a closed door that says you're not getting in. And here's the trick. When we look at nihilism, when we look at, what John Favarki and our other friends call the meaning crisis, they're all obsessed with the fact that we've arrived in some sort of nihilism today, and everything is totally useless, and we have no meaning, and we have no purpose. Our argument is that that's only because we believe we've seen the world fully, and we believe we live in a transparent world. We believe we know everything, but we don't. We don't. Glad that we don't. So the trick is to say that if you put a barred absolute in front of somebody and say that you will never get in here, but your children may, you postpone the future to another generation. And that's what history does with us anyway. We will all in this room today die before many of these amazing technologies will be developed. Hopefully not die from the bomb, but hopefully we'll survive the bomb, or the bomb won't happen. And therefore we live, we'll have a future. So we'll have a future full of new technologies, and we'll die knowing that even more technologies will be invented after we're dead. And we're not going to be part of that, but our children will be. So by just by just having this idea there, that there's a tower of God, we talk about it in the last episode, about the garden of God, and about the city of God, and these concepts that we have in the larger mind of humanity. But if we speak about the Tower of God is essentially a phallic creation. Think of it like a lighthouse, and it's blinking up there, and it has a door, and the door is locked. And on the door is a sign that says, you are not getting in here, but your children may. That's how the barred absolute functions. The barred absolute is an absolutely closed door to a sacred space, and you're not allowed in because you're the wrong person to walk in. You shouldn't be there. So this is the first rule of additionality. And this is completely contradictory to Islam and Christianity, because Islam and Christianity built the idea that everybody can walk into heaven. And the poorer you are, the more miserable you are, the greater your chance of getting into heaven. But everybody's walking to heaven one day, right? But there is no heaven, there is no hell in our religion at all. There's just life, and we die. And therefore, what's interesting for us to get hope back and to go from a cynical nihilism to an affirmative nihilism and have an affirmative view of the world and about the future is to have the barred absolute instituted. And this is what's required for men today to dream about even further technologies, and for women to regain their hope in giving birth to more children. For those two things to start again in our culture, for women to want to give birth to children, men to invent even more technology, for those things to happen in our culture, it's important that we reinstate the hope we get when we have the barred absolute. So it's funny, you see here how a negation, very Hegelian, a negation is a starting point against nihilism. Nihilism doesn't start with some hope that somebody presents. Nihilism starts with the denial. You're not getting in here. Well, if I don't know what's behind that door and I'm not getting in, then there's hope that there's something behind that door, a future, which my children can do an exodology to and become part of, and that hope will drive me the rest of my life. And that's why the barred absolute is such an important concept.